Hey guys, it's Anthony Kirby from the New Home Sales Institute. I thought I'd come into the office, crack a beer, and share something that I've had on my mind for a while that Mark and I discussed. By way of context for the episode, we had a question on our group call a couple of weeks ago, which was, what are all of the things you would do differently now, knowing what you know today compared to when you started? I've got 10 things that I've written down here, sort of old way versus new way, but I would start by saying this. I would not aim to get better at selling. I would aim to be more strategic and follow a system. The biggest mistake I think I made was just figuring out if I could just close 76 different ways and if I could just read more sales books. Problem with sales books and closing techniques and the kind of old way of doing things, it's very tactical. And tactics work when they work, but they don't work all the time. And they're not going to work in every market. Whereas a system and a strategy and a structure will provide a much better foundation for you. So I would do that. I think that would definitely increase my likelihood of making sales every week. And I'm going to take you through these 10 things now. They're in no particular order, just as we kind of thought about them and wrote them down. So first thing I would think about differently is leads. For me, when I was in display homes, back in the day, I would rely on my business, as in the marketing of the business, to generate leads. And I would rely on the developer to generate walk-in traffic in the display home that I was operating out of. What I would do now is I would build a personal pipeline through content, through managing a database, and through referrals. And there's only 3 ways you can generate leads. You can only generate leads through organic methods, which is people finding you, through paid methods, which is where you go to find them and you put your offer in front of them via Facebook ads, TikTok ads, whatever it might be, or partnership marketing. And partnership marketing is basically land developers, real estate agents, town planners, pool builders, landscapers, solicitors, all of those people who are complementary to what your offer is. Oftentimes people that your client sees in the sales process before you. So, they might go and buy a block of land and speak to a solicitor about their conveyancing before they start to look for a build. So if you can get those people up the line in the sales journey on board, you're going to get more referrals. So that's the first thing I would do. Second thing I would change is the way that I structure first conversations with clients. For me, I was educated, which felt right at the time, of course. My first boss, great guy, he taught me, when someone comes in, you qualify them hard. You want to know, do they have land? Do they have finance? Have they got a house to sell? If they've got finance, how big is their budget? And you kind of just pounce on those people and you rely on them, what I refer to now as here and now sales, big fish. The problem with big fish is that everyone's got their hook in the big fish. Everyone wants the big fish. Everyone wants to land the whale client, right? What I would do now, if I started again right now today, is I would spend much more time worrying about being useful to the client, regardless of where they're at in the process. Because what I want the client to feel today is that they were part of a team with me and that we were going to do this together. And I was going to guide them from where they were in that moment, regardless of whether they were ready or not, through that entire research phase and into that buying phase. And even if they weren't going to build with me, I would want them to think so highly of me that when they did decide to go to someone else, they'd only be doing it for one reason, which was the floor plan. I couldn't match their needs. Or second reason, if I'm honest, that I just couldn't meet their budget. There was just the real constraint that they just couldn't get enough money from the bank. They should be the only reasons why I would want to lose a deal nowadays. And I would treat every client as if they were just a friend and they were forming part of my client community, regardless of what stage they were at, because ultimately that's what it should be about, right? Third thing I would change is the way that I follow up. The old way of follow up for me was, hey, how are you going? Just checking in. Are you ready yet? That was kind of like, you'd make your phone calls on a Monday, Tuesday, and you would use that as the setup for your week, right? So it would be, are you ready? We spoke a few weeks ago. Are you ready? No. All right. Well, bugger off. Probably horrific to look back on how I used to sell in those early days. So direct, For now, if I was coming into the industry today, I would make all of my follow-up value-based so that the client felt like they were moving themselves forward rather than me pushing them. It would be more pull marketing. pull follow-up rather than push follow-up. And I certainly wouldn't make it about any sort of short shake the tree kind of moment of there's a promotion or there's a price. I think that's just so icky and everyone's doing it. So, I'd avoid that like the plague if I could. What the aim should be now for follow-up is that it is education, not interrogation. Formerly, the follow-up felt like, where are you at? What are you doing? Rather than, hey, look, I just thought this would be really useful information for you. And by the way, if you need my help, here's what I think the next step is. What do you reckon? Much, much nicer, much more respectful of the client as well. And that's not to say, by the way, that I wouldn't want for me, like I wouldn't want to not be relentless. I wouldn't want to not follow up. I wouldn't want to shy away from doing these things. But really importantly, I would want to be respectfully relentless. I would never want them to feel like I was an assassin. I would want them to see that I'm actually genuinely looking to help them, just like I am with this kind of content that I'm recording, right? So that's piece number 3. All right, piece number 4. I'm just getting my notes here. CRM. So CRM, in other words, a place to keep your leads, for simple terms, if you're not using one right now. So when I started, I used to have a spreadsheet that I would keep my kind of clients in, one row for one client. There was zero recording of calls, emails. There was no repository of information. There was a manila folder on my desk for a hot client, which had their inquiry form on the inside and all filled out with their details, and then their land information and so on, kind of stacked into the manila folder in a toast rack on my desk. And they were like my hot leads. That's like the pipeline is right there. And then I'd have the spreadsheet. And in addition to that, I would have back then, and I'm talking 2 decades ago, I used to have a program called, what was it called? Constant Contact, it was called. Basically like an original version of MailChimp or some of those email marketing tools. I think I was probably one of the first people, certainly one of the first consultants to send my own email newsletter. Back then, I used to send it out, I think, fortnightly. Anyway, that was like as complex as it got. That was my technology stack back then. For now, 100% non-negotiable, have to have a CRM. I would probably choose Go High Level or Pipedrive. Pipedrive's really, really simple to use. High Level's more complex, but also can contain a lot more stuff in there if I wanted to be a bit tricky about it. I know some people use HubSpot as well. You could even use, if I'm getting really primitive here, you could use a Trello board and just have a new card for each deal that you're working on and then move them across the sales process on Trello. Really simple and free. Really, really effective. All of your communications would go in there, or certainly all of mine would. I would record everything. The rule that we apply for all of our members in the Sales Every Week program is that if it's not in the CRM, it never happened. I still massively believe in that. I think that's really, really important. And what I would do, again, like really bringing it up to modern standards here, if it's, I would use a form of GPT, whether that's ChatGPT or Claude or Manus AI, and there's tons of them now, right? I would use something like that, and I would record all of my calls or transcribe all of my calls. I would push all of that information into the client file, and I would get it to extract the key points so that it had better quality follow-up conversations. And that would then therefore lead to how can I give them better quality and better value rather than just asking, how you going? So yeah, CRM, non-negotiable nowadays. That was number 4. Number 5, how I manage my time. I've really shifted my thought on this a lot. Back in the day, it was focus on the big fish. And if you got time, focus on the rest. And if you, take Friday afternoon to take a developer out for lunch, or Monday morning, you go out and have a coffee with the developer. That was kind of like the old school cadence that I had. Now, I really believe that you don't manage time, you manage priorities. And I'm not going to go into how I would manage those priorities because that's a whole nother podcast, whole nother episode. But what I would make sure is that I had my priorities right. And I split my time into 4 groups, and I made sure that I allocated the time in my calendar accordingly. I think if I did that, I would work a lot less hours than I used to work. I used to work easily 60 hours a week. I would be there at stupid o'clock in the morning. I'd leave at stupid o'clock at night. This was before Uber Eats. Yes, I'm that old. I remember, one time my then partner bringing me dinner on a plate with cling wrap over the top so I could eat. And that was at like 11 p.m. one night. I was just obsessed with success. It's not a good, healthy way to do it. I certainly wouldn't recommend that nowadays. I think if you can manage your priorities right, you don't need to work 100 hours a week. I think you can get away with working, 40 to 60 and having a fantastic business. Old way would be very reactive, just reacting to who walks in, reacting to the calls, the phone ringing, not really having any rhythm to how I was operating other than just book an appointment and hope for the best. Right now, I would proactively structure my day. I would proactively do that around the pipeline in the CRM. I would massively favor value adding to those long-term prospects, those little fish in the pipeline. Number 6, objection handling. Old way used to just be get through your sales process as fast as you possibly can, get to the end, and they object. They say this, you say that. Old school objection handling, Zig Ziglar style, very American. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. Still works for some people. Go your hardest, fill your boots. I think for me, one thing I've been really mindful of, certainly it's a maturity thing. I'm in my mid-40s now, and I wonder if it's maybe a bit of that, but also maybe the fact that I've been through this process myself. I've got kids. I understand how family life works. I understand that this is not easy for people who have gone through this process. There's a lot of competing interests and priorities in their world too, and I'm mindful of that. And I think what I would do is I would frame things in advance so that the objection didn't even happen. I'll give you an example of that. If you can have better quality conversations with your client about who they're going to use for their finance, and they tell you the broker is John from ABC Bank, if I could then build a relationship with John from ABC Bank and become part of their team, as in part of the team between the client, John from the bank, and myself, you're creating these little ecosystems within the sales process so that the finance issue never becomes an issue and never becomes the objection at the end, because you already know about it in appointment number 1 or appointment number 2. And you're all on the same page from that part of the process. So it doesn't become, we need to wait for John in the last part of the process, because you already know that John needs the paperwork. And guess what? John's already got the bloody paperwork because I knew about it 2 weeks ago. So I would certainly be looking to frame objections ahead of time, and I would be looking to eliminate uncertainty, because really what an objection is, if we boil it down, is uncertainty in the client's mind. And I believe that with the right rapport, with the right relationship, and with the right intention, the uncertainty can disappear pretty quick. And that's your job, right? I think in modern selling of new homes, objection handling is really sort of dealt with if you handle the deal right from the start and you respect the client. That probably leads pretty nicely to the next one that I've got on the list from Mark and I, which is the nurture process. I've talked a lot about this week across sort of LinkedIn and Instagram about the nurture system that we teach, which is the 3V system, which is you need to be visible, you need to add value, and you need to make sure they know your voice. The old way of selling was really about, you deal with people in front of you and you give the people who are long-term some brochures and you give them a card and you just say, come back when you're ready. And there's not really a mechanism to track them, because no one back then was using CRMs really. There's not the need. Honestly, I think, one of the key things I see a lot now, a lot of builders don't think they need to follow up the long-term stuff. They think they've got plenty. And, right now I'm recording this on the 1st of April. Here in Australia, the Prime Minister has just been on television warning of hard times ahead. The Reserve Bank a couple of weeks ago met and raised interest rates, and it's likely that that's going to occur again. I think, I don't ever like to be pessimistic. I'm eternally optimistic. And if you have met me in real life, you will hopefully know that. I do feel like this is going to be a really interesting time for the industry. I spoke to a really good friend of mine just today as I was going to school to pick my boys up. And she said, you know what, it's got all the feelings of COVID. And I really don't like that. And I think we've got to be really careful in the industry that we look after prospects very carefully right now and respect where they're at, because they're all scared. Well, not all. Some are scared, and we should be respectful of that, and we should find better ways to manage that. I think in addition to that, my concern is that a lot of builders are so focused on what is in front of them, and they're not focused on what's ultimately longer term. The people who are in front of them are going to fall away. The rest of the big fish in that pile are all going to get scrapped on by all the people, and it's going to be a bit of a shark sharky waters for a while, I think some people are going to get hurt. I hate to say it, and I hope it's not the case. I hope I'm wrong, but I think some builders are going to get really hurt in the next 3 to 6 months. Will that be a good thing? I think it will be a releveling of the playing field. Again, I really hope I'm wrong with this, but I feel like the builders who look after their clients and understand these concepts that I'm talking about in this episode will really flourish. Consultants will flourish, clients will have a great experience, and they'll build a lot of confidence and trust, and they will be the new face, really, rather than the sort of big McMansions. I think the McMansion builders are going to struggle big time because all they've done is sold on price, and price is not going to be a lever they can pull anymore. So anyway, getting off topic. So nurture. I think nurture is really important. I think having a system in place that does show you that you're visible in the markets. First thing, make sure you're visible. Get visible in your market every day. Do everything you can to add value to your market and the people that you're working with in your CRM, and respectful follow-up. Be the voice, right? So that's what I would work on. I would have a 2-pond system where pond 1 is the big fish. You obviously want to be competing on the people who are ready now, but also I would be building a pond of small fish. I've talked about this for well over 10 years now, that the small fish, when you are the only person at the side of the pond hand feeding the small fish, they are only going to want to feed from you. They're only going to eat your food and when they're ready. So that's how I look at it. Just like going to the zoo and watching the bird fly straight into the bird handler's hand because that bird has been handled since it was tiny. Same with your clients. All right. Number 8 on my list here is authority. Now, I didn't even know authority was a thing when I was selling houses. For me, it was all about you relied on working for a brand that spent money on marketing. So you generally would aim to work for a bigger builder, like a McMansion kind of builder. The other thing was, you'd kind of rely on your display home. You'd rely on the house that you are sitting in being really nice, or you'd rely on the building company having designs that would encourage people to come. I think if I cast my mind back, there's an event in Australia here on the Gold Coast, or here on the Gold Coast, I'm in Brisbane, just down the road on the Gold Coast. There was an event called AREC, which is the Australian Real Estate Conference. Now, I remember going to this event 10 years ago, even though I wasn't in real estate, I was in the building industry. More than 10 years ago, actually. If Charlie's 11, this must be 12 or 13 years, the last one I went to. I believe it's still going now. The event taught me something really interesting. At a time when big brands like, and again, I'm not picking on names here, but Ray Wise, LJ Hooger, Century 21, all those kind of big multinational brands. On the stage, there was just individuals, right? And I found it really interesting that this is, going back over a decade when social media was very new. And the conversation was all about how they themselves were the brand. It wasn't about Ray White anymore. It was about John Smith, who worked for Ray White. Social media leveled the playing field for the underdog. Social media made it easy for you as a real estate agent to get a listing online with more eyeballs than a newspaper on a Saturday morning. And I think that is happening now in the building industry. So again, maybe another bold prediction to push out. 1st of April, 2026. It's not an April Fool's joke, I promise. Is that I think the days of that big builder winning, just purely because they were a big builder, will it ever go away? Yes. I think it is happening right now. The boutique builder is going to win because they can service the client really well, and they can offer great value for money, and they can demonstrate that value better than the big builders can, because the big builders are just on the sort of merry-go-round of churning leads. So, there's the reliance nowadays for me, if I was coming into the industry, would be build a personal authority brand through consistent content with the mindset that people no longer buy from companies. They buy from people they know, like, and trust. And I think that the building industry is mirroring now what happened 10 years ago in real estate. And I think we'll see that evolve even more, probably exacerbated by the current world situation. Anyway, number 9, metrics. When I started out, my only thing that I would track was weekly deposits. And I know some builders track revenue. So they might, some consultants, they got paid on percentage commission. I never did get percentage commissions in the sales roles I was in, unfortunately. So for me, it was just tracking deposits that I got every week. For other people, it was tracking how much their contract values were. The problem with that is you're tracking outcomes. what I've learned since about goal setting from books like Atomic Habits and The Power of Habit is that if you look after the process, the outcome occurs. And so the way that I would think about it now is I wouldn't be tracking outcomes. I'd be tracking processes. So I'd be tracking conversations. I'd be tracking follow-up calls that I've made. I'd be tracking my conversion percentages almost like a pipeline. So I'd be looking at how many leads have I generated? What sources have they come from? Organic, paid, partner. Which one's working? Which one's not? Which one can I leverage? I'd be looking at how many of those leads have resulted in A, a connection, B, an appointment. And then from those appointments, how many did I get to a design? From those designs, how many did I get to a proposal, a price guide? From that, how many then did I get to the outcome that we wanted, which would be like the logical next step of them giving us some money and committing to taking some next steps with us. There is, I'm going to butcher this quote, but the old book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where they talk about control the controllables. So in my mind, if I could control the inputs, then the outputs I know would largely take care of themselves as long as I'm following a system, which comes back to my original point. And if I was getting really sort of micro on this, I would say that it's important to set who am I at my best, and that's kind of like the benchmark. But also, who am I at my worst when I don't feel like doing this? Who am I when it's cold outside? Who am I when I've got the flu? Will I still answer the phone? Still having those minimum expectations of yourself. Too many people set the high end. Too many people set the bar, but they forget to also then go, well, I'm not always going to feel like my best. That's just human nature. And maybe that's just as I've become a dad and as I've matured a little bit that I've recognized, like some days I just can't. Some days I can't be all of that, but I can still be this. And that's really important. So we call it a ceiling and a floor. So who are you at your best? The ceiling. What's the non-negotiables? The floor. Setting those two things. And the final thing is, what identity do I have about myself? My identity when I started selling was I'm a sales consultant. And my identity today would be I build a community of clients and I am a market shaper. I am moving the market in my local area, my local community. I'm building this ecosystem of all of these clients that I'm working with, whether they buy off me or not, they've just got good vibes. I'm putting great energy out into the market. I'm well responded to. I'm well liked. I'm respected. And that's because I give value and because I'm visible and because I have a voice that matters rather than I'm just here to sell houses. I think that's really important. To put it a different way, treating it like a business within a business. So if I was working for a building company, with the greatest of respect to that building company, I would also then be looking at, well, you know what? They have to pay to open the doors. There's a cost for my seat. There's a cost for every lead that walks in the door. And I would be looking at, well, if I had to put $1,000 into the marketing fund every week, would I work differently? Like, yes, of course I would if it was my money. And I just think there's so much blasé attitude sometimes with sales consultants nowadays that they just think, the next lead's coming. Instead of like, actually, have I really done everything that I could possibly do for that lead? And just be way more responsive to that. So, to bring this home, I would say that, the old way was very reactive for me. My new way would be very structured. The old way for me was very effort-led, like, get there early, leave late. Now I would just rely on better systems, and especially now with, the tools that we have at our disposal. The old way was to chase sales. The new way is to create client communities. And I think for me, if I came into the industry right now and I got this right, I wouldn't be riding the market. I'd be consistently selling regardless of what's going on with the oil price and the wars. I wouldn't be relying so much on the luck of the draw of who's going to walk in and am I good enough to jag them before they go to another builder. I would be building a pipeline that fed me every week because I'd be using great systems and the CRM. And I think for me, that's the difference between hoping for sales and expecting them. And I've got no idea whether this has been a useful episode. It's certainly been fun to get this out there. And if you are listening to this as a consultant or as a sales manager or as a business leader, and you think, you know what, I wouldn't mind having a chat to Kirby and Mark and seeing how they could maybe help us with our sales team, just head over to newhomesalesinstitute.com, pop your details in, and we'll give you a call and we'll have a chat and see if there's something we can help you with. I hope that was a useful episode. Speak to you guys later.